Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are across the globe. I hope I'm very audible.
Yes, you are. We can hear you, Emmanuel.
Great. All right. So you are welcome to this session where we will be looking at data protection and privacy. Where is Africa's position? Where are we coming from? And where are we now? And what are we supposed to be doing also? All right. I would quickly do this presentation, then we would have more time for discussion, questions and answers to enlighten us in other scopes and areas as well. Okay. So where does Africa stand in the revolution of data protection and privacy across the world? In modern times, data protection has been a great topic and has dominated a lot of discussion, both in the government circles and by technological giants across the world. And Africa has not been totally left out in this conversation. So we will be looking at where do we stand as Africans? What is our authorities doing in Africa to also bring us to par with the world and other jurisdictions? So in this session, we shall be looking at these core areas, the current state of privacy and data protection in Africa, and we also delve into privacy and data protection at the AU level. What is the AU level doing? Then we also look at few challenges and opportunities for Africa. Then we'll delve into the way forward for us as Africans and how we can also harness the opportunities within the areas of data protection and privacy. So our current state as Africans, where are we? Now, how did we start and where are we? Over the last 2 decades, series of multinational conferences aimed at discussing continental standards for personal data protection has been on the rise across Africa. So 2 decades, we are talking about 20 years back. There have been several discussions, both at the government level, the private sector levels. There have been communications, discussions to see where do we place Africa? Where are we going in terms of data protection for our own people? And these consultations have resulted in 4 major frameworks, which are: 1, the first one is the AU Convention on Cyber Security and Personal Data Protection. And this happened as far back as the year 2014. And this is popularly known as the Malabo Convention. Then came the ECOWAS Supplementary Act on Personal Data Protection. Our brothers at the southern sector, which is the SADC, also came out with a data protection model law to also guide us, SADC community, how they can also regulate data protection in their sector. Then came the EAC, Legal Framework for Cyber Laws, in the year 2008, phase 1. However, none of these policies have been ratified by all states. By ratification, we mean not all countries have endorsed and implemented these frameworks or recommendations as have been agreed over the past years. So what we are experiencing now is that national legislation has been the centerpiece effort thus far. So we don't have a unified form of regulation yet as African continent. All right. Now, looking at the position where we are, as of February 2022, only 33 out of the 54 African countries have data protection laws or regulations in place. And most of these ones, between the year 2000 and 2022, we have seen a lot of countries coming on board, which add up to the 33 out of the 54. Now, immediately after the Malabo Convention, the AU and ISOC, the Internet Society, jointly developed what we call the Personal Data Protection Guidelines for Africa. These guidelines actually set out the modalities which African countries need to follow to guide them develop their own data protection laws and regulations to guide their citizens. Although globally, if you look at the poster and the picture, the approach to implementation of data protection laws have been very, very slow. But comparatively, ratification of the Malabo Convention by African countries is much slower. Because if you look at the span of almost 2 decades, and we have only 33 out of the 54, which gives us what? 21 more countries yet to adopt and implement data protection laws and legislations in their various jurisdictions. This puts the African continent in terms of data protection and privacy law enactment and implementation across the globe behind. It places Africa behind. So if you compare from the Western world, what is happening in the EU, the EEA, you look at Asia, you look at the US and other jurisdictions, and you compare that to the adoption by African countries, you could see that Africa is lagging a little behind if you compare the implementation processes and how these countries are adopting data protection laws and regulations. Now, looking at the AU level, countries, we have 33 out of the 54. But what is the AU in itself doing, or what is happening at the AU level to help us understand better how the AU in itself is embracing data protection? Now, the Malabo Convention happened in the year June 2014. And this revolutionized the need for data protection and privacy in Africa. So during the Malabo Convention or conference, a lot of African leaders expressed their interest in terms of data protection and how these can help their citizens protect the privacy of their citizenry and also foster trade among themselves. Now, immediately after the Malabo Convention, there was an African Forum on Personal Data Protection held in Dakar in the year 2015. The main objective, or one of the main critical objectives of this forum, was to provide a framework for consultation on the privacy and data protection issues and challenges facing Africa. So you could see that it was very clear in the minds of the authorities that Africa indeed needed its own data protection and privacy issues or regulatory framework to enable it meet the demands and the challenges facing Africa. Then onwards, in the year 2016, there was the formation of what we call the Network of African Data Protection Authorities. So this consisted of all the various regulatory authorities in the various countries coming together to actually form an association, bringing all the expertise and the various advancements made by each of the authorities or countries together to foster a uniform dispensation of data protection on the African continent. Then came the very first Africa Regional Data Protection Privacy International Conference, which was held in Ghana. And this was one of the very big data protection conferences across the world. It was so huge, and we had a lot of experts coming from all over the world. There were more than 1,000 participants from across various parts of the world who participated in this conference. During this conference too, a lot of commitments were made. Discussions were held and experts gave their views as to how Africa can harness data protection to her advantage. Then fast forward to 2022, just this year, March, Smart Africa signed an MOU with the African Network of Data Protection Authorities. And the main aim was to provide institutional support and enhance the enforcement capacity of the African national authorities. So there was the need to actually build the capacity of the regulatory authorities in these African countries to help build a very formidable data protection practices within the various countries. Now, what are the challenges facing these authorities or data protection across the African continent? One of the very first one is data sovereignty, which is which country rules and regulations should apply to data subjects when it comes to data protection. For example, I am in Ghana here, somebody is in Malawi. Whose data, which rules or which country's rules will spearhead or will be taken into account when data subjects are involved within these two jurisdictions? So every country wants to protect their own data, including foreigners within their jurisdictions. So that is one of the biggest challenges in the area of data protection. Which countries' rules should be applied? Now, data localization is also another challenge. That is, any data on the citizens or residents of a nation must be collected, processed, and stored within the country's borders. And this is very evidential. For example, when you take the Nigerian data protection regulation, the NDPR, the main content of it is that said that all government data must reside within the borders of Nigeria. Not only Nigeria, there are other countries as well that places emphasis on data localization. It is a challenge because if you look at the developmental strategy in terms of digital performance in Africa, localizing data where you wouldn't be able to export data to other countries will become a challenge for development. Now, you come also to infrastructure, which is the increasing use of cloud infrastructure, which are geographically distributed across various data centers, even outside the African jurisdiction. So, for example, if a country or a nation, an African nation, is hosting its data in Amazon Cloud, Google Cloud, or whichever of the clouds outside the jurisdiction of Africa, it becomes very difficult for you to implement your country's laws on these international cloud service providers. Because number one, they are not physically residing within the country of operation. They are outside, and all these things are accessible via technology outside of the country's jurisdiction. So that also is a challenge. Now, another challenge is the cross-border data transfer. This often proves to be a challenge for enterprises due to regulations, data residency requirements, and enterprise-specific practices that restrict the transfer of data across borders. So organizations are unable to export or process data outside certain jurisdictions because of the data protection regulations in place. So you are forced to process everything within that country's jurisdiction. Now, another major challenge is the policy enforcement failures. Now, most of the data protection regulations that we have, they come with compliance, and non-compliance leads to enforcement of or imposition of certain fines. However, government agencies are difficult in our part of the world in Africa to penalize. And institutional failures in public sector institutions are rarely addressed unless it becomes so harmful and substantial enough where the public outcry overshadows the government agency before government or regulatory authorities seems to now come in. And this is what is facing a lot of these data protection regulation authorities. Yes, it is written in the books. We have it clearly printed in the laws. But implementing these things becomes very difficult, especially when it involves government agencies. And in our part of the world also, government agencies hold very huge volumes of data in their custody. But they seem to be protected in a way because of how difficult the bureaucratic ways and means to ensure or enforce these regulations within these sectors is also a big challenge. Now, there's what we call the transplant effects. And these are set that when laws are imposed on the population unfamiliar with them, initial demand for using these laws would be weak. Legal intermediaries will have a more difficult time developing the law to match the demand. And their legal order will function less effectively than those countries that either adapted the law to local conditions or had a population that was familiar with the transplanted law. Now, the concept of privacy in the African terrain is quite very different from how privacy is seen and practiced outside Africa. In our context, digitization has brought about privacy issues to us, which we are gradually embracing. But within the African culture and a pure African setting perspective, how we see, adopt, and appreciate privacy issues are quite different from how it is done outside. So if implementation of these laws are not fine-tuned to the African way of doing and appreciating things, it will be very difficult for law enforcement or legal intermediaries to implement these laws according to our demands and settings here. Now, another challenge is the threat by the international actors. And to be specific, if we take the West, China, and America, through extraterritorial requirements, they have insisted that international players abide by their data protection standards. It is worth asking that whether Europe or European, Chinese, American companies abide by the same standard when handling the personal data of Africans as they do when they are handling their own European, Chinese, or American citizens. Would an African country's data protection law be accepted as adequate in the EEA, that is the European Community areas, US, or China? Most of the time, it has been on African countries to abide by their international standards. So, for example, GDPR is strongly implemented and adhered to, and African businesses, governments seeking to do business with their European counterparts, these laws are strictly enforced. However, are they able to also accept the African laws and implement it as they are? Or would they be able to implement the same level of protection they would give to their citizens to Africans' data once it is within their jurisdiction? We talk of what we call the adequacy. The adequacy is where, for example, the GDPR recognizes certain countries as having put in place adequate protection. Hence, the rules are not strictly applied. But would African countries' data protection law also be deemed as adequate? Currently, as we speak, it is only South Africa's law that I know is in the process of being looked at to see if it is adequate. What about the other jurisdictions or other countries' data protection laws? That is also a challenge for us. Now, notwithstanding the challenges mentioned, there are opportunities for Africans too as well. The unification of the various data protection laws, which in Europe transisted into what we call the GDPR, has brought a lot of benefit to the European community and to the West. And as seen in the industry as the GDPR being one of the mothers or the spearheading regulations in terms of data protection in the world. Now, when Africans come together and we are able to harmonize an AU-wide data protection laws, this will make it easier to implement across the AU member countries. Now, it is easier for countries in Europe to have a common standard because of the GDPR, and it enhances trade, it enhances free movement of data for developmental agendas. Now, national legislation is actually insufficient to ensure robust data privacy and digital rights protection for citizens, especially in countries and regions where the rule of law is very weak. We know in Africa, the rule of law has not been very consistent across or evenly distributed across. However, data protection affects each and every individual, regardless of whether the rule of law is weak or the rule of law is strong. They are African citizens and their data needs to be protected. However, a harmonization, bringing together a framework that will see to it that all the various laws enacted across the Africa region is harmonized into a comprehensive AU data protection where all the African countries will abide and operate with, would go in a very long way to benefit each and every African citizen. It will make it very easy for data, cross-border data transfers for innovations and development to easily take place within the African continent. And countries with limited resources will also benefit from the experience and support from the others. Well, in Africa, we say all the fingers are not equal. Yes, in terms of economic-wise, democratic infrastructures and governance mechanism, we are not all equal in Africa. However, if we all, or Africa has an AU-wide data protection law or framework that covers and protects every African citizen, it therefore means that every single African will be protected under that AU law. Now, secondly, another opportunity is putting in place or establishing an AU-wide data protection law or convention around shared principles, a commitment to finding violators would deter both domestic and foreign actors who seek to take advantage of weak national enforcement in some African countries. Because some African countries that do not have, currently we have 21 of them who do not have any form of regulations in terms of data protection. However, if there is an AU-wide framework governing laws, it would help these countries peradventure, it may be due to logistical constraints, the financial muscle to be able to push this agenda. But once they all belong to the AU and they are part of the AU, a harmonized AU-wide data protection law will have all these countries covered. So they can also take advantage of the benefits that data protection offers. The stronger and capable nations would cover that of the weaker and smaller nations so that we can all, as African citizens, enjoy data protection. All right. Now, what is the way forward for us as Africans? Now, the AU must ensure they coordinate their efforts in the area of one, legal enforcement at the AU level. Well, and I am using Ghana as an example. Ghana has been a leading role player in terms of enforcement, to the extent that the Data Protection Commission of Ghana has liaised with the judiciary to establish a specialized court which will be dealing with only data protection laws or issues within the country. So at the AU level, if efforts are put in that same direction as has been spearheaded by Ghana, then it would mean that issues regarding data protection can be swiftly dealt with. All right. This is clearly seen in terms of the GDPR, where we have the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, dealing on matters of what? GDPR at the European level. So it will bring the African continent to a speedy resolution of issues related with what? Data privacy and data protection. Then awareness and education is also very key. And if you look at across the continent, just recently on the 19th, I think that was Tuesday, we had Tanzania launching data protection and privacy campaign. It was a very massive one, if you had the opportunity to witness it on Zoom, with a clear-cut agenda to create awareness and education. And if you look across the continent also, South Africa has had a solid awareness machinery and engagement strategy, both on radio, public engagement, and a formidable social media front, which is bringing the awareness and education to its citizens and beyond. So the AU can also foster into these aspects, aside the contribution at the policy-making level. If AU can dedicate its efforts and resources into creating the awareness and education, it will go a long way to help each and every citizen, AU citizen or African citizens. Now, with regard to sanctions, if you have had a chance to look at sanctions imposed at the European level, those who violate GDPR, and the giants in technology, the Amazons, the Google, the Facebook, have not been left out. Sanctions have been placed severely on them, and they have paid penalties of millions of cedis, millions of what? Euros and pounds and dollars to that effect. Now, in terms of sanctions, if you look at Nigeria and South Africa, they have been very proactive in their investigation of foreign technology giants. Nigeria has never been very silent on this. They have been very aggressive, and they have taken on these technological giants. And South Africa has also done same. Well, is it by way of the strength of the population of Nigeria when it comes to the international level? Is that why they are able to do so? What if Nigeria and South Africa have been able to do this? Then you can imagine if the entire AU also places or gives a clear-cut framework that places very severe sanctions on defaulting technological partners or giants or those in the industry. Nigeria authorities have been issuing fines on very regular basis, and enforcement has been identified as a priority in several countries. Yes, they are there, but how robust are these sanctions being implemented? Of course, Ghana has tried. We are on the verge. We are on the way. The awareness is there. But sanctions have been very difficult to implement, especially when it comes to financial sanctions. And if you critically look at most of the laws too, you could see that if you compare the kind of sanctions and financial implication it has on European in terms of the GDPR, the CCPA, and others, if you compare the amount or the sanctions placed by the African authorities, it is very, very minimal. These are, let me use the language, peanuts that individuals or organizations can easily pay and go scot-free if it is about financial sanctions. But it should go just beyond the financial sanctions and impose very restrictive and very severe sanctions on any nation or giant or partners that violate the data privacy of Africans. Now, another effort that the AU can put forward is the training and certification, a standard across the entire African Union. And again, if you look at this, Ghana has been a very leading, has a very comprehensive and strict requirements as to who can practice as a data privacy expert in Ghana. And this has gone through it goes through a very robust training and certification process, making it difficult for people who do not have the requisite skills to be able to play in this area. Now, of late, we've seen influx of other nationals from across the AU joining the trainings in Ghana, which tells us that what Ghana has put in place is very formidable. And this is very recommended. If the AU can put effort into training and certification, building localized capacity to be able to train experts in the field, to be able to handle issues of data protection and privacy at our own level, that will go a long way to help build a formidable data privacy culture within the African continent. Then again, data sovereignty, a review at the AU level. Well, it is imperative and well known that every nation wants to have sovereignty over their own data. And national data sovereignty moves can hamper regional data sharing, trade, foreign investment, and innovation, and can be a counter to the AU policy framework. We are in the era where data is dominating. We need data for analysis. We need data to come into very informed conclusions, to do a lot of innovations. However, if you look at the African continent level, no single organization or country would be able to provide this level of data that we need. So it is imperative that the framework that we put in place, data localization among or by the various countries, we need a review to look at it so that it will not be inhibitive, but rather will collaborate sharing across and within the African continent to enable technology drivers across the various sections or across the African continent to utilize for research purposes and for innovations that will inure to our benefits as African citizens. A framework is needed to govern inter-African cross-border data flows. However, it should primarily be enabling and not restrictive, as currently is the case with most countries. For example, Nigeria, with very huge volumes of data, have very strict data localization laws. It is good. However, looking at it from the AU perspective, inter-country or cross-border data sharing needs to be reviewed so that we would harness it with very comprehensive regulations that will ensure that each and every nation is able to harness and utilize this data for the purposes of innovation and for the advancement of digitization within the African continent. Then again, sanctions should be looked at again. Although penalties for non-compliance exist in most of the data protection laws across Africa, the quantum of the fines are so little, offenders can easily pay and be left of them. So we need to revisit the sanction. Then also, a unified data processing register is also recommended. So at the AU level, the efforts should be channeled out looking for a unified data processing register where we would have all registered data processors across the continent registered and given and certified to operate and to process African citizens' data. However, for this to be effective and to contribute to the transparency and enable the exercise of data subject rights, the register must be accessible which require what? Digital access. We should make it accessible. So before an agency, an institution establish a contract or agrees for another institution to process their data, they would verify and ensure that these agencies are duly registered with the appropriate authorities in Africa to ensure that they are being regulated. For example, in the case of Ghana, before you can process citizens' data or data of data subjects, you need to be registered with the Data Protection Commission. And this cut across most of the countries within the AU. You need to be registered. But however, if we are dealing, for example, let's take the Africa Free Continental Trade, the AFTA, for example. Yes, signing up to this means that I am able to deal with what Nigeria would process data with them and do trading activities going beyond, going to Egypt, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa. However, if I am unable or the institution is unable to verify the presence or the due registration of these technological partners to deal with, it will put impediment on our way. So if the AU can look at registering, pushing the agenda so that all data processors within the African region are all registered and is accessible across all the African states and the entire world, that will also go a long way to help us as Africans. All right. Then the next one is yes, so that's it for it's a unified data processing. So looking at this, once we are all, or the African continent is able to come and with coordinated efforts, put up a formidable data privacy framework or to build on existing one to harmonize it across the entirety of Africa, we all as African citizens would really have the benefits to all of us. We would all enjoy it. Sharing data will be very easy. The restrictions will not be so much, will be lowered so that all organizations, all countries can harness the benefit that data protection offers all of us. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I bring my presentation to a close and I'll open up for more interactions by way of comments, questions, and then the responses would be provided. So you can unmute if you will have any questions whilst I go through the comments that people have passed to see if there are any comments there. How can one become a data protection privacy expert? Is there a certification program that one can undertake? Please, I need your advice. Yes, to become a data protection or privacy expert, you need to have some form of training. Well, in Ghana, we have an established institution or form of certification called the Data Protection Supervisors course, Certified Data Protection Supervisor, which is a course that you would have to undertake. You write the exams and then you are certified by the Data Protection Commission. However, this has gone to the African level, the continental level, where they are seeking to adopt a unified form of training and certification, which means that once you have that certification, it will be usable and acceptable across all the AU or the African countries. Some of the countries also have their own, which you would have to certify. So you look for the specific country from where you are, that you can undertake these courses. There are also, however, international associations or well-known courses like the International Association of Privacy Practitioners, IAPP, which also has some courses specifically for data protection experts. We also have the ISACA. ISACA has also introduced courses in that where you can also undertake. However, data protection needs much more of the time practice to be able to gain an understanding. And because of the various jurisdictional laws across the various countries, one needs to abreast him or herself with these laws across the various continents and countries to familiarize yourself with this. For example, if you are working with an international company where you have operations across most countries in Africa or across the world, then you will need to be dealing with country level specific jurisdictional laws or commitment or obligations which you would have to adhere to. So yes, it is possible for you to do so. Just find the appropriate courses that you would have to do. So you look at the IAPP one, the ISACA one, then the country specific one also, which is also very good. And I also recommend that of Ghana because it has the component of almost all the African requirements.
It should be on record. It's also a person. What about the last one? That's green chairs.
Yes, I think I agree with
That's
Linda.
not linking the. It's okay, like if you're getting. Oh, okay.
Yes, like Linda is saying, is I think we need to create and advocate for more for the accommodation of the data protection laws from Africa, or think of a unified one like the GDPR. That is very insightful, and that is what we are advocating for, so that we could also, as Africans, have a standard for ourselves. So operating from here in Malawi or with Malawian companies, there's a very standard, a uniform platform which we have all subscribed to, and it makes trading very easy for all of us. Yes, more capacity building might be needed to fill the gap. Yes, currently there is still lack of skill sets within the data protection and privacy sector currently. So more experts are needed, more people are needed, more capacity building is needed. And I think that this has also been one of the reasons why implementation of some of these laws have delayed. Yes, you will have the regulations in place, but however, do you have enough experts to be able to handle and deal with the issues happening on the ground? Else, what will happen is that the regulatory authorities will end up taking every institution in their various jurisdictions to the law courts, because one, there's the lack of the human capacity, expertise to deal with the issues as it relates. So yes, much more is needed. Yes, Prince is saying, if AU should decide to regulate the data protection in Africa, won't some countries also think about their interests first before coming to set a rule like what we see when it comes to UN? Yes, with data protection, because it is protecting the citizens, I don't think there will be so much apathy like we see at the UN level. You know, at the UN level, we are playing muscles with veto power and the rest. But these are things that affect our citizens directly. And one of the beautiful things about data protection is that when you look at the fraternity, there's a very cordial relationship between agencies or regulatory bodies across Africa, and which led to the establishment of the African-wide Authorities Association, which is very instrumental with the recent signing of the MOU with the Smart Africa Alliance to foster and build capacity. So I think there will be more advantage to coming together than if we don't come together. So looking forward that one day we would have an African data protection regulation, ADPR. Yes, Isaac, it is very, very possible. And I think such discussions are what will trigger further discussions for all of us to actually put our heads together and join the call when it comes. Yes, somebody is suggesting a multi-stakeholder approach should be the best way to achievement of ADPR and not an option. Yes, a multi-stakeholder engagement has always seen and driven the successful implementation of policies that affects people and everyone. So yes, it is very imperative, both at the policy-making level, the government level, private sector participation, individual organizations, and civil society organizations as well. When we are all engaged, it makes and brings meaning to this. So what is the AU doing to strengthen data protection privacy, to inspire trust among the populace, especially when foreign agencies get contracts to process and digitally transmit election results in most African countries? Results that are often disputed due to disbeliefs of manipulation leading to election violence. So, okay, what is the AU doing to strengthen data protection to inspire? All right, I think to look at it, if we look at the history and how it all started right from the Malabo Convention in 2014 up to the current signing of MOU between Smart Africa and the African Association of Data Protection Regulators, which was recently done in March. It tells us that there's at least that effort to bring this or to harmonize these laws, to have a framework that will guide all the other countries. However, when it comes to issues of result transmission, well, that is quite political, and that one also need a very in-depth analysis of how these things can be done. Because when it comes to matters of election, this takes very different dimensions. But at the core of it now, we are looking to protect you and I as African citizens, how our data will not be misused by either our own companies within or jurisdictions outside the continent can misuse that. Then the GDPR is based on the European treaties, and ADPR will have to be by creating a new treaty that countries would have to ratify and agree to jurisdiction of the African courts, judging by the existing conventions. And this seems unlikely. Well, to you, it may seem unlikely, but I see it the other way, that it starts with a journey. Say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. At least, if we have had, from 2014 till now, we've had 33 countries ratifying the Malabo Convention. Then in the near future, now, that 21 that is left to, not that they are aloof, most of them have it in the progress, just that it has not been completed. So it is, some are works in progress that maybe in the coming years, it could be tomorrow, it could be the next week, it could be the next month, would also have these things rectified. However, having an ADPR, I think the tone is what we are setting. It has been set. And this fora that we are having also is complementing this to push forward the agenda so that we could all have a unified ADPR, which will seek to protect African citizens, just like the way the GDPR is protecting European citizens, and ADPR will also protect African citizens. And the jurisdiction of the African court, well, I don't know about the legalities of those, but still there's a way this thing could be done. Once we put our heads together, once we agree as Africans to do that, there will definitely be a way to do that. Yes, Europe has done it. China has done it. Why can't African also do it? We are more than able to also do that. What should guide the establishment of data protection authorities to avoid authoritarianism, sovereignty, etc.? Because the government normally decide its creation and sometimes becomes dependent from the government, that's financial, technical. But this authority must be independent as recommended by the Malabo Convention. Yes, Herman, exactly so. So the independence of the intended ADPR, if that should be the name, is very critical to the enforcement of the laws. Where it becomes dependent on government and resources are not going, these regulatory authorities are unable to function by themselves. So the independence of such a body would be one of the core tenets to fostering data protection on the African continent. So I agree perfectly with you. That is one of the critical areas that needs to be harmonized to avoid authoritarianism and sovereignty. It will be something that is embodies every single African nation. Yes, just as the Malabo Convention envisaged. What is saying, Malabo has not yet come into force, not enough ratifications. Yes, but there has been a headway. The headway is that we currently have 33 out of the 54. So at least we have more than half of the nations who have ratified this. And bear in mind also that the ratification is a process. So out of these 21, there are some that are far advanced in terms of the ratification process. Some just need to be appended by the president of the that particular nation, ascension of it, so that it becomes a law. Okay. Some are also still at the technical stages. And what we are also seeing that some of the countries absolutely lacks the resources to be able to do so. So if they are unable, not that they are not willing, but the resources and the mechanism to do that, those are the issues they are battling with now. However, if we have the AU-wide one, there's lesser nations are also covered. So yes, it has not been ratified by almost all the countries, but it is still a work in progress that every nation is seeking to actually do. But the 13 ratification, like I said, now it is 33 now. So if you are looking still at the figure of 13, then that is a little bit outdated, because they're currently, as we stand, as of February 2022, we have 33 nations with data protection regulations in place. Yes, bear in mind, that is a website and they could not have the accurate information as it is. So check the facts and you would attest to it that right now we have 33 countries that have laws in place. Yes, any more questions? All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no more questions, thank you so much for participating in this particular session. And we hope Africa will also has its own data protection regulations that will cover and speak for you and I as African citizens to ensure that, yes, we are on the African continent and individual or country-wise data protection laws do not inhibit, but rather a unified African data protection law will unify all of us to make sharing of data in a very secure way, very much easy across African countries, so that we can all benefit of the advantages and opportunities that data protection has to offer to us. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. And to our colleagues in Malawi, who will be having the closing ceremony soon, we wish you all the best and a very fruitful deliberations as well. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, whilst we wait to join our other colleagues for the closing ceremony today. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And in Ghana, we say, Bye-bye.
Hello, Emmanuel.
Yes, hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sorry, my name is Joseph. I joined the meeting very late. Can you please share with us
Okay.
the presentation?
Yes, just subscribe to the organizers will share the slides. They will do so.
Okay, because during the before we joined, we registered, so I'm hoping they could do that with us.
Sure. Yes, that's fine.
That
So
was
if you have
a very good presentation. Thank you very much.
all right, thank you too.
Welcome. Bye.